Welcome to Property People, the show for anyone with a passion or interest in property. From design, build, purchase, sale, and everything in between, this show is for you. I'm your host, Andrew Rhatigan, and I'm the director of Rhatigan Real Estate, an agency that helps clients buy and sell property in Ireland over €500,000. Please sit back, relax, and enjoy. Hello and welcome to today's episode, and where I have the pleasure of speaking with Mary Conway of Janus Estates. Mary has a number of years' experience in the property industry, but what makes her very interesting is the years of experience outside of property, and this led her to see a demand for this at a different stage in life. Today's topic is about rightsizing, and no better person than Mary to discuss this topic. Mary, you're very welcome to the show. How are you?
Good, Andrew, and thank you very much for the invitation. It's lovely to be chatting to you.
Absolute pleasure.
And I'm absolutely passionate about this subject of rightsizing. Some people call it downsizing, but I think that has negative connotations. I would like to think that I facilitate people to live in the right place at the right time, at the right stage of life. And that is where I'm working from.
I think it's a fabulous outlook to have. And I tell you, for our listeners who aren't familiar with your name and those who may see the J in it and misspell it, it's important to maybe tell us a little bit about, the origins of what made you come up with the name for the company to start with.
Yeah, my company is Janus Estates, and Janus is the Roman god of new beginnings. And Janus has two faces, which left me agonizing a bit whether I choose the name or not. But the two faces are, one is acknowledging the past, while the other is looking to the future. And when I thought about it in depth, I decided this was a really good name because I want to look and I want to acknowledge with people who are rightsizing what has gone before and their current possessions, while looking to the future and looking at a new beginning as a fresh start. Whatever time in life they decide to do it, and work with their experiences going forward.
So I think it's fair to say that the thoughtful element of what you do actually began when you thought of the name of the company. So it wasn't a case of onto the company's registrations office, what can I pick that makes it, that makes sense to someone? You really put thought in this whole process from the very outset.
Yes, I'm a member of the National Association of Senior Move Managers in North America. And I have done my training through them, and I go to their conferences and do all their training. And a lot of the companies in the States have the word transitions in their title. And I was, trying to work something around transitions. And transition is not a word we use here very often. You often hear transition as transition into the next life here. So I didn't want to use that. So Janus was the name I finally settled on, and I'm very happy with it.
Well, I think anyone who's met you or experienced what you do could definitely say that there's nothing two-faced about how you conduct yourself and the special nature of what you do. So tell us a little bit about yourself and, what got you interested in property?
Well, I have been a landlord for many years. I bought my first property about 27 years ago. It was a buy-to-let, a student let in Drumcondra. And then over the years, I built up and bought a few more properties over the years. And all the time I was still nursing. I was a specialist nurse in Beaumont Hospital. And then I had a bit of a life transition, I suppose, myself back in 2013. And I left nursing in 2015 to go back to college to do my certificate in real estate. And one Saturday afternoon in class, I was extremely bored in a law lecture, and I was reading the New York Times, and I saw an article about somebody who had used a senior move manager in New York about moving from a very big house to a smaller apartment and how it was achieved. I've always enjoyed working with my older patients as a nurse, and I thought this is something that I could do. I could use my experience as a nurse and my interest and knowledge in property and put the two things together. So that's how it was born.
Wow, that's fascinating. So I think one of the biggest things that most people when they look at how people get into property is that they almost never understand or never see the transition. But for you, it was that natural, the practical element where you were involved in property personally, where you were a landlord and you purchased property, but then you're dovetailing that with your experiences in nursing. And by virtue of being bored in a law lecture, who would have thought that law wasn't fascinating, as we all in property know? And you happened upon this. So, out of interest, where did you see the kind of role of nursing um, kind of dovetail or connect alongside what you hoped to do with property? Because like you said, internationally there are certain standards of how people move, transition, and right size, and often in Ireland we're maybe last to the party or we're not familiar with it. So what part did nursing play in that choice to bring the two together?
I suppose I've always been interested in, where my patients went after they left hospital. What kind of home conditions did they go home to? Who was at home with them? Where did they live? Did they have access to services? Going back to the early 80s when I was a student, I remember being horrified by one of my patients saying that he'd just had his lung removed for cancer, that he lived on a fifth floor flat in a well-known Dublin building, and that there was five flats on his floor, and they shared a sink on the corridor for washing and one toilet. And I had just come up from the country, very sheltered young girl from 6 years in a convent boarding school. And I was very shocked by this, that, somebody didn't have proper running water within their own space. And that was the 80s. And then over the years, I worked as a bowel cancer nurse specialist, and patients may have had surgery to remove part of their bowels, and they would have had a stoma, a colostomy, or an ileostomy. Were they going home to facilities with running water? Again, in some cases, things were quite primitive, and we would have worked with social workers to organise bathrooms or things like that for them. So I just saw my role, I suppose, in this, that I've the knowledge of older people and working with older people. I love working with older people. I have three, I would call them my Dublin mammies. One is one of my aunts who's almost 89, and the other two are neighbours. All three are going to be 89 this year. And they have such wisdom to impart if you just sit down and listen and take the time to listen. And they've been great mentors to me over the years.
And isn't it an amazing testament to, I suppose, the humanity of what you do, that you put such an important, I suppose, such an important emphasis on the import of the kind of what actually someone at a latter stage in life can actually have for themselves, but also the knowledge they can impart on other people. Because I think when people are young and they're running around either trying to build a business or trying to build a family or education or make money, it's very easy to forget those who paved the way. But you're really putting a priority and you're shining a spotlight on those who were here and were that young person at one point, but also that they still have something to give. And that could be something to give to, like you said, a neighbor like yourself, where you can have a reciprocal relationship, but also advice, impart knowledge, and also give you a great sense of, what's also to come. If you're kind of if you let them talk and let them teach you all about what they've learned.
Yes. I remember, I think the only day in all my nursing career that I came home and I cried was a day that I was asked to see a patient in the emergency department. He was an elderly man. He had bowel cancer. And I went in just through casualty to try and find him. And I saw him through the window of his room trying to change his underclothes. And there was nobody to help him. He was completely exposed because the place was so busy. And I remember thinking, I have had an easy life. He's one of the men who has built this state, who has paid his taxes, and he doesn't even have the dignity of somewhere private to change his clothes. And I found that really tough. And I think, when you're younger, you just sail through life and you don't see these things. As you get older, you realize what's important in life and what people have done before you and have made the society we live in easy for us. They've paid
Absolutely.
their taxes, they've worked hard. And I think older people tend to get forgotten about in a lot of cases. In the Irish system, there's only home or nursing home, there's nothing in between. We've a lot to learn from our European counterparts and our American counterparts as well, with regards to caring for the elderly, with regards to dementia villages, independent living, assisted living, then a nursing home. There are people in nursing homes who probably don't need to be there from a physical or mental point of view, but there's nobody to take care of them at home.
And like you said, it's a real juxtaposition where it's one or the other. Whereas in other countries like America, and we all know the, Floridian retirement villas, and we've heard of the other experiments where they have, like you said, the Alzheimer's villages or dementia villages, where they try and encourage, a safe environment for them to live as independently as they can at different stages of either their life or their illness. Well, I think the one word that you said about the gentleman, which is a tragic story, but it really stood out, which is dignity. Is that something that plays a big role in the term right sizing? Because I found that when you're working with people, everyone has a story. But I think at the base of all of everything we always do, whether it's buying, selling, renting, helping people move, is the fact that people want to be respected. And as someone gets that little bit older, you're looking at that stage of transition in terms of a place that may be suitable if they were to make a few tweaks, but they almost don't see that. So what would be the most common misconceptions about right sizing from your point of view and your experience?
I suppose the biggest challenge for a lot of people is their stuff, what they have acquired over all the years, and they can't bear to part with it. That everything means something to them. And houses just fill up with loads of ornaments and loads of clutter and loads of anything. And they can't see past that part of, I'm living in a 4-bedroom house, I need to move to an apartment, but I can't take everything with me. And that can be absolutely overwhelming. And part of my job will be to facilitate the decluttering and working with the person. And I'm not a Marie Kondo. I'm not one of these people who say, well, do you absolutely love it? But say, for example, somebody that has a huge collection of teapots, maybe 30 teapots. Every time somebody goes on holidays, they bring a teapot. They can't bring, obviously, 30 teapots, but we can do something with the teapots. We can take photographs of them and put them into a coffee table book or put them into a nice frame that they can still enjoy it. And it's about the memories. It's keeping the memories, not the stuff. It's the title of one of the senior move managers' books in America just now. And that makes so much sense, that you take the emotion out of it. And I'm the person that comes in and does that, because I'm not emotionally attached to the item, whatever it is. And you sit with the person and you let them explain to you why they have it, or why they're holding on to it, or why they want to keep it. And sometimes that can be enough for them just to let it go. And it's about acknowledging, it's not dismissing it all as a worthless pile of junk, even if you think it is. This is something that they're attached to. And how do you take the emotion out to help them move on?
That's really profound. And I think it's probably something that so many people, and I suppose in my line of work, I mean, I'd be like yourself, where I help people buy and sell, but I look at every stage of what someone's doing as the next adventure. And I think when someone is moving from a large house that basically is probably, from a social standpoint, kind of told people who they are, and that's their identity. So I own a 4-bedroom property in XYZ with a large garden, and they think by moving to something smaller or in a different location that they're either losing out because they're changing. And much like you said, with downsizing is seen as, well, I'm downgrading, I'm losing something. Yes. And part of that process is exploring the emotional attachment that people have to stuff. And we all have a room that, the fancy dining room that gets used once a year. The stuff gets cleared out for the one event, people pack in, and then it's packed up again with all the rubbish that we don't want to see for the rest of the year. But one of the really interesting things that you said was the fact that you are able to take that independent approach to care and talk through each object or each story, but you then have the emotional detachment where you can say, Mr. Client, Mrs. Client, I completely understand, but here's from an outside point of view. You're still empathetic, you're still caring, you're still kind, you can kind of really put the same question to them that they probably haven't wanted to ask, which is there something else we can do to still hold on to this memory? Because the memory doesn't need to be on the shelf. The memory's in your mind or in a book,
Yes.
or part of a story that you can tell yourself by, looking at other things that are kind of more efficient to keep, but also probably give them a bit more relief so they don't have as much clutter. So they feel a little bit more comfortable in their new space.
Yes, and I got a referral during the week, and it sounded on paper like my ideal client. And I rang her, and she told me she was living in a 5-bedroom bungalow. And I said, "Who lives with you?" And she said, "My husband." And I said, "What do you do with the 5 bedrooms?" And she said, "Well, we've our bedroom, and then my husband has a bedroom as an office, and I have a bedroom for my sewing machine. And then we've a spare bedroom if anybody comes. But of course, nobody comes anymore because of COVID. And then, well, the other room, we just close it up." And then she said to me, "I couldn't possibly move. I've traveled a lot. I've lots of ornaments that I bought on my travels. My cleaner says that there's too much dusting to be done and I've too much junk. But these are my memories and I'm not going anywhere and nobody's going to push me into it." And she said, "My children will love my things when I'm gone." So this is a lady who has major health issues, needs to move to a smaller space, and has been talking about it for the last 2 or 3 years, but hasn't really made any move. And it's purely because she's attached to things that her children will probably just put in a skip when she dies. The Swedish have this great concept of death decluttering, so that when you die, that your family have very little to deal with. That as you go along in life, you get rid of things. So by the time it comes to your family, clearing out your estate, that you've only 2 or 3 small boxes to deal with.
Wow, I think that actually falls into the next part I was going to ask you, which is, isn't it almost when people are thinking of making that next move, and that it forms part of their identity and their dignity, which is when people have the opportunity to change their location or to rejig where they live to make it more suitable, that they don't realize that making that decision when they don't necessarily have to make it is far easier than doing so when you suddenly get a bout of bad health or an event happens that suddenly changes life as you know it. And I always equate it to shopping when you're hungry. We all know that when you get really hungry, we make bad decisions. And as soon as we're not hungry anymore, we wish we bought something better before we needed to. And in this circumstance, like you said, what I think probably is something that a lot of people do is they probably hold on to things because they feel either that they don't want to, like you said, change what the narrative of what they've already known, but also there's an element of leaving things for the next generation. And that could be monetary as well. So someone saying, well, I don't want to spend the money to change my life at the moment because such and such could use the money for doing something later on. And one thing I've noticed by chatting with you is it's a very Irish thing where we almost don't want to be selfish in a positive way at a latter stage in life to enjoy that next part of our lives, because you can't write someone off after a certain age and say, well, just sit there in the corner, look out the window and just wait it out. And the rest of us will keep on living. We're all living longer. Healthcare is encouraging us to be able to take far more vitamins and far more treatments that help us and empower us to live a lot longer. And someone who's at that stage in life probably needs to be encouraged to say, look, this stuff that you have in your house, this was you. This is a lovely memory to have, but what about the next 10 years? What about the next 15 years potentially? Or it could be 5 years, but 5 years of a new experience or a new feeling of powerful, comfort or, that kind of sense of belonging again is probably a big thing you probably see with people, I assume.
Yes, because a lot of the time people approach me to start this, they're in their late 70s, early 80s. And if you think about it, these are people that were born after the war, when there was poverty and there was rationing and things like that. And, they bought their house maybe in the 60s or 70s and they paid maybe €300 or £300 back then for a couch, which was a huge amount of money. It might have been a couple of weeks' wages and they saved for it. And you're looking at the couch now and they want to bring it to the new house and you're thinking, oh my God, this is hideous and it's not going to fit because it's too big, because furniture has very much changed. But you have to realize that, there is an attachment to this because they saved for it. It was a huge amount of money. it's still a good piece of furniture, but it's not the right piece of furniture. And that, they've always held on to things for a rainy day and they're still holding out. And the other thing is, Irish people, older Irish people feel that they have to leave something to the generation behind, that they have to leave them a house to sell or money or whatever, rather than spending money on themselves at a particular stage in life. It's like a man I had as a patient who was in really poor condition when he came for surgery and was eating very badly. And when I investigated further, all his money was been gone into a savings account so that when he died, he could be buried in his native Limerick and everybody would have a good day out on him. And, he was waiting on this day that he was never going to enjoy. But, he was, I suppose, keeping face for his family that he had left money for them to enjoy. And a lot of it is that just people are leaving this till late in their life. I have neighbours directly across from me who had quite a large house and realised that it was too hard to heat. And they're very active. They went and built a 2-bedroomed house, a very nice house for their old age. They put a lift in to bring them directly up into their bedroom. And they're now in their very early 70s. They go off a couple of times a year on holidays, and their heating bills and other electricity bills come to less than €1,000 a year. And they really have done it right because they did it when they were able to do it. They had the energy and the enthusiasm. And I think what I'm trying to do is to tell people, not to put this off too long, because as you say, the medical condition will happen suddenly, or, the fall and broken pelvis. And then what happens? There's nothing sorted out or adapted. And this isn't all about moving. It's about, maybe adapting their current home to stay there. And what can we do to even just declutter the living room so that they can walk around the coffee table or not trip across cords on the floor?
That's actually, and out of interest, what proportion of people generally, obviously it's a very rough estimate, but what that from you see could adapt where they live in their own home versus either selling for something more suitable or moving to a different location? Because most people probably, firstly, don't want to talk about it because for fear of, if I talk about it, it could happen or make me come across a certain way. But secondly, mightn't understand how a space could be reconfigured, because if you're not in property and you don't know how construction works, you don't know that the small understairs ensuite or toilet might be able to turn into a more functional wet room if you do have the space for it. So what proportion would you see could kind of work with the space they have versus have to sell or move on to something else?
Well, the problem with selling and moving on to somewhere else is most people have grown up or have lived in a particular community for so long, and they don't want to move outside their community. I mean, what do people really want at latter stage in life? They want a shop that they can walk to buy their little basics. They want access to a GP. They want bus access, possibly to a hospital. And in a lot of cases, they want a place of worship. So they want to stay within their community. Developers up to now really haven't built anything to accommodate older people. In places like Canada, you have what's called multi-generational living, where you have maybe a duplex apartment for a family upstairs and then an older person downstairs. That hasn't really happened here. So, with a bit of thought, a lot of houses can be modified if somebody will accept the idea that a downstairs sitting room is turned into a bedroom, that they don't have to go upstairs, or a chair lift can be put in, a stair lift can be put in, or a bathroom can be built out the back. And there are quite generous grants that can be obtained for things to be done. Last weekend, I was down in Carlow. There's a wonderful Irish company called Halo Care, and they're producing monitors, like falls detection systems and security systems, medication dispensing systems, lots of little things that can keep somebody in their home for longer and keep them safe without being intrusive. So there's lots of things out there that can be done to keep somebody in their own home, But again, they have to have an open mind on it.
And probably also the national discussion or the national conversation about the next stage of life, like that dialogue about aging and how to empower people and educate them. Because I think when you're young, you don't care. I mean, when I was 18, I was never going to be 30. And then when I was 30, I realized 40 was only around the corner. And I'm saying that now as a 37-year-old, and I'm joking, but I also know that time flies by. And I think it's very easy to forget that when you're in the prime, a certain prime of your life, as we call it now, you don't think about the latter stages because you don't think about having a sore back or having other medical conditions. There's probably a lot to be said for actually creating that open, I suppose, an open source of knowledge and information for people to understand that by approaching someone like yourself or approaching someone in government or having some sort of a support network, that you're not defeated and you're not giving up, and you're also not a drain on people. Because like we said, these older people have paved the way for those who live now and probably live fabulous lives on the foundations of what these people have created, and to kind of really encourage them to really explore the next stage of their life. So like in terms of this kind of retirement village element, do you think that there's something where the government could empower a developer to take a longer term view on maybe a lower density, retirement specific setup, where it could be, maybe a long leasehold where you could have, I've heard of some of them where you can buy the property, and then when it has to be sold at a latter stage, it has to be sold through the ownership of the actual retirement village itself to another, and I'm not going to say a needy case, but someone who it applies to. So you couldn't have an investor coming in and buying 20 units to rent to the elderly, that it's almost kind of this elderly ecosystem where it's kind of being kept and reused for people who need it for a period of their lives, and they either move somewhere else or they pass on. And then it could be repurposed again to someone, much like the American model. Do you think that there's a real opportunity there if people really stopped and kind of, I know at the moment, supply isn't such limited. It's so limited at the moment in Ireland, and everyone talks about figures and trying to get people in properties. But I suppose it's almost a reverse engineering, that if you put those who are in larger properties in a position to make a choice. Now, I'm not saying put them in a village. I'm saying give them the opportunity to say, well, look, this is another type of living. This is within the same distance as your bridge club, your beloved family members, whatever. And then that gives you kind of a natural opening up of the property market in a different way. Do you think that there's an opportunity there, or is that something that people probably don't want to think about at the moment? With the need for property, where it's a case of build more, build higher, just get them up, get them sold.
Well, first of all, there's this Irish thing that you have to have your front door and your back door and your garden. A lot of older Irish people won't embrace apartment living. So there's a bit of a mindset change there. It is being done on a scale at the moment by the associated housing bodies. In particular, I don't know if you're familiar with Clon. Clon is the over 55 section of Clúid, and Clúid is one of the biggest housing bodies in the country, and they have created some amazing communities. There's one in Cabra, they've one in Louth, they've some all over the country where they have purpose-built senior living with supports in place, and are doing some amazing work. And then in addition, they have bought some apartments in family developments. I had great fun in September when an elderly, well, he's not that elderly, a gentleman rang me. He had just got the keys to his new home, courtesy of Clúid, and he didn't know where to start with regards to flooring or curtains or bedding or anything. And he moved in. I organised everything, his floors, his white goods, made up his bed, hung his curtains, and he arrived in with his 2 suitcases. And he was in the private rental system, and he was always afraid that his landlord was going to sell up and he'd be moved on. So he's now in his early 60s, and he knows that he has somewhere safe to call home. He calls it his forever home. Courtesy of Clúid, who are doing this all around the country.
Wow. And I would, there's another story when it comes to, obviously property can be very divisive, especially in Ireland. And much like you said, where people have grown up in a certain area and they want to live in the same area.
Mm.
But this is a news story that I would love to see discussed more, because this is what shows people that there are elements of the market that are moving forward in a certain way that's helping people. And when you said about that gentleman, like you said, obviously the rental system is, you could have a separate conversation or 10 conversations about the rental market. But the fact that that gentleman at that stage in life, the one thing he wanted was that certainty to know that that front door was going to be his for however long that would be. And then the decision was up to him to live as he pleased. But then that kind of falls under the heading of dignity, because that certainty gave him the opportunity to explore the next stage of his life. Now he's only in his 60s, so I'm sure it gave him that sense to take a breather, relax, and then begin to kind of almost commit to the area even more so, rather than worrying that he may not be there in 2 years' time or 3 years' time from if the property was taken and sold, if he was in the private sector. And you mentioned you kind of helped him kit out the property. So this is really interesting from the point of view of what you do. So what does that journey look like when someone wants to work with you? So for example, you could have, you can give us kind of a case study or an example that, someone who calls you. Tell us a little bit about what that kind of journey is like for someone.
It's different for everybody, I suppose. He had been living in the same flat, I think, for about 18 years. And he had applied to the housing body to get a house, and he got a house in Clonsilla, and it was an apartment, a ground floor apartment, 1 bed, A-rated, absolutely super. And it just came as a bare shell, and he'd never done anything like this before. So he rang me and he said, I don't know where to start. And I said, well, look, I'll meet you over there. We'll see what you need. And his biggest thing was that he'd grown up in the country, and the house at his family home for him was net curtains. His mother always had fresh, clean, white net curtains. And the only thing he stipulated was that I would put net curtains throughout. And that's what signified home for him. Now, are net curtains fashionable? Are net curtains used? I don't know. I don't care. But that's what he wanted. And when he came in, the first thing he did was went over and pulled the net curtain. So we got him a bed, we got him his lockers, he had his built-in wardrobe, we put in his light shades, he told me that he didn't want a cooker because he doesn't really cook. And I said, absolute nonsense. I said, you're going to get a cooker, and if I have to teach you cooking myself, I will. So we put in the cooker and we put in his microwave, and he's now roasting his leg of lambs and his roast beef. And he said for the first time, he finally feels at home since he left his home 40, 50 years ago.
Wow. That's a very touching story, that when you think of property, you don't think of, and it sounds funny, like you said, with net curtains, but who cares?
Yeah.
Because that's what mattered to him.
Yeah. And there's nothing designer about it. I went to Dunn's to get his bed linen. I went to IKEA to get his lampshades. This wasn't a high-end fit out. It was what I thought would suit him. And he's just delighted with himself.
And therein lies the prime example of why you do what you do, because at the core of everything you do is what that person wants. And I think in property, people can see flashy, brand new apartments that have been kitted out to the nines on the front of the Irish Times. And there's nothing to say that they're not fabulous, and it's a great achievement in building and design. But we also have to remember that at the end of it all, someone has to live in a space, and everyone's version of home is different. Yes. And by you taking on that client, you listened to them rather than talked at them and said, well, here's a package. Here's what we can fit out. And by the way, here's a color palette that is all the rage for 2021, 2022. You sat down and you actually shut your mouth and you listened to what he had to say. And I think that's actually very profound, because most people nowadays don't think of that. They don't realize that, like you said, net curtains. Oh, we wouldn't do that because of such wise, and what would such and such say? Yeah. But at the end of it all, at the end of the day, we all have our comfy clothes that we get into. We all have our favorite cup that we have our coffee in. It's not the cup we take out if we had visitors over, but it makes the best cup of tea or coffee as far as I'm concerned. Yeah. And you really looked at the core of that. That's really, I think that's it's probably something that's really missed with people, because they don't realize that if they stopped and listened, And all you have to do is give someone something that matters to them. And that can be the difference between empowering and changing someone's life for the better, or having them go back into themselves and say, no, I'm not going to do this. This isn't what I want. Because almost people can imprint what they think you want, as opposed to listening and saying, this is what you want. And out of interest, you mentioned that example as a kind of kitting out another space. But say if you had someone, we'll use an example of Mildred Smith, who has a very nice 3 or 4 bedroom property in a certain location. And she's maybe had 1 or 2 falls in the last year or two. She's been fiercely independent. She loves her space. She loves her local shops, her local bridge club. She has tea in her house with her local friends, all that kind of stuff. What would that look like for someone like her or her family who are trying to explore that kind of very easy transition into the conversation about what could happen or what could be her options going forward? What would that look like?
Well, it starts by just meeting her at her home and having just a quick look at everything, and looking at if she's had falls. Why has she had falls? Is it because the place is too cluttered with furniture and she can't move around? Or are there different levels in the house that could be sorted out? Or is she going upstairs when there's enough space downstairs? Is there somewhere we could put a downstairs bathroom, or even just a downstairs toilet that she doesn't have to go upstairs during the day? If she's fiercely independent and she is still with it in her mind, is there some kind of a monitoring system we can put in to give her a bit of peace of mind and her family? So I would call Tom Owens down in Halo and ask him to come up and see whether we can put in fall detection monitors. Now, nothing is a camera, nothing is spying on her, but she could have a nice piece of jewellery around her neck that is also a fall detection alarm, as well as something she can press if she needs help. Can we modify her bathroom in some way? If there's a bath, can we take the bath out and put in a wet room or a more friendly shower? I'd have a look at her kitchen and look at her kitchen cupboards, and to see, is she climbing on something to reach into cupboards, and is that why she's fallen? Can we move everything down closer to her? If she's somebody who forgets to turn off the taps, we can put in a leak detection system. Or if it's somebody that's cooking on gas and you're afraid that the gas is going to go out and that there's going to be an escape, we could put something in like an induction hob. So there's lots of little things that we could do to modify everything and keep it safer for her, but still give her independence.
And that's probably where being a nurse and having, because I remember my late mother was a nurse, and I think nursing is probably one of the main types of jobs that is beyond a job. It is absolutely, without a shadow of a doubt, a calling. And I think when you're dealing with someone in those circumstances, you have that nursing hat on, which is the practicality. You have the detachment because you care, you know that you don't have to see that person at Christmas. So you have that kind of emotional detachment. But I also think there's something that nurses have, and some of the most amazing nurses I've met have it like you do, which is that kind of real respectful empathy, understanding what it could be like for someone to have this conversation with you. So you've got that underlying need to kind of advise them accordingly, but it's never this kind of, black and white. Listen, you've got to stop cooking. It's over. Give it up. You're trying to say, well, no, look, let's figure out a safe way to do this. You can still enjoy it, but let's make it where your kids know that you're safe. You feel that you're safe, but you also feel that you have as much control as you are able to handle, or that you feel you're able to handle at that certain stage. And I think that's really profound. I think that's a huge part of something that could change someone's life, that it's a few tweaks. It doesn't have to be this complete overhaul. It could be a case of, listen, your kitchen was fit for purpose, much like anyone. I have a sitting room that is currently commandeered by a 6-year-old and a 1-year-old. And in a period of time, it will no longer be a playroom. It'll be maybe a room that my kids want to hide from me. I don't know, but it'll change what it needs to be now. And much like someone's life, when they were 50, 45, 50, and now they're 70, 75, their needs have changed. And you're just trying to get them to look at that.
Yeah. And I went to visit a lady recently. She she had this notion that she was going to bring her brother home to live with her. And her brother, it's an old house, and her brother is used to his home comforts, let's put it that way. And she didn't have proper heating. She had steps down into her kitchen, and she had a lot of steps up to her bathroom. And I'm saying to her, this really isn't going to work, because we need to do a lot of modifications before you bring him. Now, he has since gone on to a nursing home, which is where he should have been going from the start, but I couldn't exactly say that to her. I had to kind of be very gentle with her and say, he's coming from a very nice environment, and he has medical issues where every need is taken care of. And you're going to be 80 shortly. Do you really think you can do this? So we've turned it around now that she's going to do the modifications for herself for her old age. And if her brother is able to come home, for an afternoon or whatever, he will have the downstairs toilet. He won't have to struggle up the stairs, and we're sorting out her heating. But it was only because we said we were doing it so that he could come on occasions. She didn't want any of this for herself. Now, she's very fit and well and able to get around, but she needs a little bit of comfort.
And I think probably there's almost an underlying fierce survival mode that people who are that little bit older have. I think we all forget that you have that natural flow of life where you're young and you're flexible, you have loads of energy, you don't get hungover, everything, the world is your oyster. But I also think as you transition and you meet people who are that bit older, there is that element of you don't get there really by accident. You have to have a certain personality, I think. And it could be a case of someone who either has a routine, someone who likes things a certain way, someone who can, sometimes it's as someone I know says, dogged perseverance, where they just keep going. So, the heating's broken, they throw on another coat, whatever it might be.
Yes.
And I think by having those gentle conversations, you have to be very tactful, I'm sure, with those people and also their family, because when you're coming in, and we all know in property, you could have one agent that comes in and tells you how it is, but they deliver it a certain way and it's taken in the wrong way. And I think it's the delivery of that kind of news or that kind of information from yourself that people probably don't realize is so important, because you have that caring element, you have that professional element of your nursing background, but then you also have the practical element of this is a 3-story terraced house in the middle of Rathmines. It does not suit what this person needs right now. And then also you have to pick your battles. So you might say, well, this person needs 3 conversations over the course of the next 3 months, and I might get them 60% of the way there. So there's a real element of patience in what you have to do as well. And does that play a big role in how you interact with families as well? Do you find that you get the support from families, or can it be quite a difficult position for them to be in?
The family dynamics can be absolutely huge, and you mightn't establish that on the first meeting. But I would always say in a conversation with a potential client, and what do your family think about this? And a lot of cases, the family mightn't even know she's meeting me, or they may have organised it. And you can have one member of family who's very supportive and is doing everything to help the older person, and then the other person who's running completely in the opposite direction because they can see their inheritance trickling down the drain. So family dynamics are very important, but my focus is always on the client and what's best for the client.
And I probably think there's a real merit in even what you just said there, and that's probably where we'll leave it. But I think it's very important for people to realize that you don't have to be a yes person to do well in what it is you do. And I think, it's very easy to say yes in the short term to keep people happy. So, for example, you say, no problem, sure, we'll sell it and we'll make loads of money, and then you can figure it out after that. And then you realize that the area they live in doesn't have a kind of a property they want. But also you have that kind of steadfastness to say, look, I have kids. I know what it's like. I know what it's like to be in a difficult position. We all appreciate our health until it starts to change. And you're almost having to be an advocate for that person as well, because you're able to say to the family with a real, you have the right head on your shoulders. It's not like you're looking to take the money from the client and put it in your bank account. You're saying, listen, this is what you can really enjoy as the next stage of your life. kids will be okay eventually. Sitting there and hoping that, X amount of money now will get to them in 15 years' time doesn't make you any happier now. And they almost need that kind of advocate to say, well, look, here's what I think. Here's what I'm doing from a genuine, caring, but also professional perspective. And I'm sure, do you get pushback quite often, or do people suddenly realize, wow, this is actually a great opportunity? Or is it something that it can be quite fractious at times?
Can be, and I would always tell it as I think it is for the client. I had a client recently, and I had brought them to see something, and I rang the family afterwards, and I just said, "Look, I really don't know that this is the best choice for your parents. I think they might be better in some kind of more sheltered accommodation rather than an apartment on their own. But I will adapt it whatever way possible." And they just weren't hearing me. And then I just said, look, from my nursing point of view, I don't think your dad is very well. I think he needs some attention. And then within a quite a short space of time, the person ended up in hospital, and the move is now on hold. And that was a difficult conversation, but I feel I had the conversation and it wasn't heard.
Yeah, I know what you mean.
But there's only so much you can say to somebody without being rude and upsetting them. And in hindsight, I think maybe I should have been a bit more forceful and say, look, you're not hearing me, but I didn't. But I suppose that comes with experience. And they weren't in a position to hear that, what I had to say.
Well, I think anyone I think anyone who's in property, though, would probably, especially any professionals, we all know people who don't like to hear what they need to hear, even if they need to hear it. And I think one of the biggest things that I have time for when I meet professionals in property is you can't please everyone all the time. But if your intentions are right and you feel it needs to be said, you have to look at yourself like you do other professions. So you could have a mechanic that takes your money today, smiles politely, and says he's going to fix something, knowing full well something else is going to be needed in 3 weeks' time. And you feel you're getting away lightly today. You then have the guy or girl who says, listen, there's XYZ that's going to go wrong on this. If you look at it now, it's going to be easier than it will be later. And sometimes people say, wow, isn't that great? But 90% of the time people say, no, sure, it's fine for now. And then they almost have to learn on their own. But I think one of the great benefits of your really kind of empathetic way of doing things is you really try and put it across to people the best way you can from the right place. You're not doing it to, sell them short or to get one up on them. And I think there are some people that it has to sit with them and they have to then realize, wow, that was the right thing to do. But it can't happen all the time. And I think one of the natures of your personality that makes you very special in what you do, because I do know you personally, is you have the ability to say something in a caring way, but also leave it when it needs to be left. And there's no judgment, rather than, have it out for the sake of your ego. And you're kind of saying, no, I'm telling you, this is how it has to be. And if you don't like it, I'm leaving. It's almost a parental role. You have to leave them to come back to you if they so choose at that point in time and say, okay, well, here's where we are now. Let's keep moving forward. And that's kind of one of the things that probably sums up what you do for a living. But that also goes back to that element of a dignified way of being dealt with deep respect.
Yeah, because I know how we had a situation in my own family. My parents live on the family farm, and my brother lives there with his wife and 3 kids. And mom and dad were living in the 2-story part of the house, and my brother was living in the extension. And then dad got to the stage, he had early stage dementia and he was falling and he couldn't manage the stairs. So they did a huge swap around in the house, in that my brother and his wife and kids moved into the main part of the house, and my parents moved into the single-story extension. And my mum was really resistant to moving downstairs because she had her chest upstairs with everything in it, including her wedding dress, her all the cards and telegrams that came when we were born. Now we're all in our 50s at this stage. And she didn't want to part with anything. And my sister-in-law worked with her and they managed to get rid of everything, and my parents moved downstairs and it worked really well. And that was conflict in just one small space. And, I'm expecting somebody to move out of their home and into somewhere completely different. So I do realize that it's a huge challenge. It's a huge decision to make. It's not something that's going to be made overnight, that it's going to take people some time to get their head around. And, it could be many visits before they finally decide this is the right thing to do. And, I'm prepared to do that. Once, we know where they're going and that they're going to a safer environment than the one they're in now.
And I think to finish it up, that probably sums up that you have the patience and the kindness matched with the professional approach to do what needs to be done, but in that person's time, which is probably what makes Janus such a unique offering. But I think it's been fascinating talking to you, and I have no doubt that anyone who listens to this going forward may have some questions. So we'll make sure to put your details in the show notes. And in terms of contacting you, I'll put the email and the phone number on it as well. And I'm sure that anyone who has any queries, big, small, or even exploring what maybe suit maybe the possible conversation to have going forward, will benefit from a 5-minute chat with yourself, which will no doubt lead to a cup of tea or 3 at some point in the future. But it was an absolute pleasure speaking with you, Mary. And thank you so much for your time today.
And thank you so much for having me. I've really enjoyed the chat. Thank you.
I'm delighted, Mary. Take care. That's it for another show. If you have any comments, questions, or want to get in touch, I would love to hear from you. If you like what you hear, please feel free to share with colleagues, family, and friends. Until next time, I've been your host, Andrew Rhatigan, and you have been listening to Property People.